My name is Sara Smith. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a professor of history at American River College, and today's date is August 10th, 2023. So let's start off by establishing the basics. What's your full name? What are your pronouns? And what's your date of birth?
My name is Dale Milo Green. My pronouns are he, him, and they, them. And my date of birth is 3/2/2000.
Tell me a little about yourself. What are your interests and hobbies? What do you like to do?
Currently, I'm a student at Sac City College, Administration of Justice major. I really, really enjoy studying law and learning about the way that people are treated unfairly in our system and how to change that. I also really enjoy spending time with my son and doing art. I'm constantly reading, drawing, and just playing with my kid. He's about to be 6.
So where did you grow up and where do you live now?
I was born in Washington, but I grew up for the first 16 years of my life here in Sacramento. And then when I was 16, we moved to the Bay Area with the intentions of me going to the art academy. Found out how much tuition was there and ended up just living there for the past, 4 years in between there and Sacramento. I very much enjoy it here, though.
So you do?
Yeah.
Why do you enjoy Sacramento?
It's just always felt like home, even though I wasn't actually born here. Like being raised here, the city has a different resonance than anywhere else in the country for me. And I do love traveling, but I always end up coming back here.
So you said you currently attend Sac City College and you study administration of justice. Are you full-time or part-time?
I'm starting up full time this fall semester for the first time. I've been part time for the past 3 years.
Is that when you started 3 years ago?
hmm
And why were you part-time, if you don't mind my asking?
My disability, and it was just easier to do online learning with part time. Having to manage your own time and schedule, it can be really difficult to do more than 2 courses at a time.
And why have you decided to be in person this fall?
I decided to be in person this fall because I have less of a fear about being on campus. I was really, really worried with the pandemic and everything about being around other people and in group settings and stuff, but I finally feel comfortable enough to do so again. And I also found that when I'm at home by myself doing my homework, because I'm a single parent, it's kind of boring. I'd rather be around other people who are learning the same stuff as me. I feel like it'd be more enriching of an environment.
So what are your educational and career goals?
Well, I really want to do forensics, forensic analyst first is kind of the initial goal, and then I want to become a pathologist eventually. I'm looking into, after graduating from Sac City, doing some legal advocacy, especially for like helping people with their name change documents and other sorts of gender marker change, stuff like that. Just other any kind of advocacy. Essentially, I'm going to look into volunteering at first and maybe finding an internship in that field.
What's a forensic pathologist?
Forensic pathologist is the person at either the hospital or the morgue that does the autopsies.
And why are you thinking about going into pathology?
The main reason it is kind of a selfless reason. There's a lot of bodies stacked up across the country that are waiting for autopsy results, and there's not enough people in the field. From my experience and learning, there are people in the field. It's not a level of productivity that I feel like our government wishes to achieve, and the more forensic pathologists there are, the quicker they'll be able to achieve those goals.
How did you learn about forensic pathology?
I've always been into NCIS, CSI, stuff like that. I've been learning, though, from my college education that those shows are not realistic. They barely scrape the surface and like reach the bare minimum of what the science really is.
So can you tell me how you identify with regard to your social identities broadly speaking? So race, ethnicity, sexuality, gender, ability, religion, and so
So like I mentioned, I am a single parent. I identify as white and Native American. I'm third generation Native American, Blackfoot tribe. I identify as two-spirit, even though I also identify as transmasculine and non-binary. Um, in regards to other diversity stuff, I am also disabled, mentally working on figuring out if I am or not physically, but I do have a hypermobility that I'm working on diagnosing. It's been a long process, but I because I'm a trans individual, deal with a lot of gender dysphoria, and that's the biggest thing that disables me. Honestly, before I had my surgery, I would be in crippling pain in bed, like unable to get up because of the dissociation between my body and my identity.
So, what about religion and sexual orientation?
Oh, I am pagan. I mostly identify with spiritualism in surface conversation because not a lot of people want to hear about paganism. They automatically associate it with negative ideas that aren't necessarily what my religion identifies with. My religion is more based off of the idea that everything is one and equal, and the exchange of give and take is really important in my religion. And then sexuality, I am bisexual and demisexual, and demisexuality is umbrella term under asexuality, which essentially my experience of it means that I don't feel comfortable being physically or sexually intimate with anybody until I have an emotional or mental connection with that person.
So you said you identify. Oh, is there anything else you want to say about your social identities before I ask some follow-up questions?
Not that I can think of right now.
Okay. So you said a little bit about what it means to be bisexual and demisexual, but is there anything else you'd like to say about what that means to you?
Pardon. I think that being bisexual to me just means that I'm attracted to people who are the same gender as me and who are a different gender than me, not necessarily that I'm attracted to men and women. But other than that, I don't think there's really any more elaboration necessary.
Okay. And you identify as transmasc, non-binary. You use he, them pronouns. Can you talk about what, can you elaborate some if possible? What do these identities mean to you? And can you explain why you use both he, him, and they, them pronouns, if you don't mind?
So automatically, the first thing that comes to mind in regards to my pronouns is my entire life and experience with being perceived is that being a girl wasn't something that I really identified with, like just being feminine in general. I never identified with it. I always identified more with androgyny and masculinity, and I am still not a binary male, but do identify with masculinity still. So with that, I use he, him pronouns because it respects a certain side of my identity, but I use they, them pronouns as well to acknowledge the other side of my gender identity. And I use them interchangeably. I don't have a preference between either pronouns. I came out when I was 15 with they, them pronouns, and when I was 19 with he, him, they, them pronouns. But like I said, never associated with feminine pronouns, identity. The only thing I've associated with femininely is appearance and gender presentation.
So I think you said that you identify as Two-Spirit.
Yes, yeah. My religion, Two-Spirit with my religion and ethnicity is a very broad definition of what being transgender is, and it's just the acknowledgement of the spiritual side of the transgender experience. It's really important to me when I acknowledge that I'm Two-Spirit, that people aren't misinterpreting that for me being a man and a woman. I'm either or neither, not both, if that makes sense.
And can you is there anything you want to say to elaborate on that question? So when you talk about spirituality as connected to your trans identity, what do you mean by that?
So what that means for me and what that really looks like is that I have kind of used my expression and gender identity and also physically transitioning as a way to get closer to my own self, which in turn with my religion and spirituality just heightens my ability to do my practice, essentially. And what my practice is just ritualistic celebration of life, essentially. That's like the most simple way I can put it.
And you said you're Blackfoot?
Yes, Blackfoot Indian. My mother's grandfather was first generation.
And are there any specific spiritual sort of, or are there specific roles or ways of being spiritual as a Two-Spirit person among the for you and your identity as Blackfoot?
So in my tribe and in many Native American tribes, the Two-Spirit and or shamans are kind of seen in the same way in light as each other. Most of the time, a Two-Spirit person will also be a shaman or a healer. The way that I see it is my tribe respects Two-Spirit people on the level that they have something, as far as the human experience goes, to teach everybody else. And it's really important in my tribe that those people are seen and accepted wholly, like not just partially, the way that our society tries to pick and choose what parts of people are allowed to exist. The big importance of Two-Spirit individuals in my tribe is that their existence is profound and celebrated, like not in the way that they're better than anybody, but just in the way that people acknowledge what they can learn from Two-Spirit individuals.
Is there any specific language?
Other than percussion, no. But percussion instruments are a language in my tribe.
I mean, like specific language referring to Two-Spirit identities.
Yeah, no, not that I know of or can think of from my personal experience, but there definitely could be outside of my knowledge.
So, is there anything else you want to say about that before my next question? Anything you want to elaborate on?
Not that I can think of. If I want to come back to it, I definitely will.
So how would you compare your experiences with trans masculinity to cis masculinity, if you would?
Wow.
Big question.
Yeah, that is a big question. So I think because of my identifying with the kind of wrong gender for so many years, I was kind of taught that masculinity is something I should avoid, like from a very young age. I was told to be dainty and soft and feminine and stuff. I always like I said, associated with masculinity. And I think that the difference between my experience and a cis man's experience is that cis men's masculinity is celebrated, whereas my masculinity was tolerated. And it's unfortunate to say that, but I didn't have the most receptive or educated family in regards to identities. My mom didn't know how to help educate me on two-spirit identities and stuff like that because she's very much in touch with Western culture. I learned about those things through a mentor, which is, she is Native American as well, but part of a different tribe, which I cannot remember which one. But I learned a lot from her and then a lot from my grandpa. But unfortunately, my mom was very much like, you are a girl, and would even correct people out in public when they would misgender me as a boy. That was, I think, the first time I knew I was trans was when I was a little kid in the grocery store and the clerk called me a handsome young man. And my mom corrected them, and her correcting them was wrong. Like, it didn't feel right. What they said was affirming, you know?
Do you think your identities as non-binary, as transmasculine, as two-spirit, do they help help you glean some kind of insight into gender? That is like, is there some insight that you have to offer about the meaning of gender or the sort of gendered experiences that people have that often go unquestioned? I guess also a big there.
No, I actually have something that immediately came to mind when you asked me that question. So the big thing that I am honestly preaching everywhere I go is that gender identity and gender presentation are two different things. People have a really hard time acknowledging that those are separate and that people can present however they want. That doesn't mean that that is their gender identity unless they say so. I think that it's really important to acknowledge the political climate that we're in right now with trans healthcare and families having issues with, you know, not only trans parents but trans kids receiving the care and just basic human rights that everybody deserves. I think it's really important to point out that trans people, gay people, any people part of the LGBTQ plus community, we don't want your kids to be gay. We don't want your kids to be trans. We just want trans and gay kids to live. Like, it's just really important that we see them and we say, we believe you, and that those kids are heard.
So can you talk some about your coming out experience? What was the process like of figuring out your identities?
Well, I came out twice, rather three times. The first two times were relatively close together when I was 15. One was about my gender identity and the other was about my bisexuality. And when I was 15, I only had come out as non-binary. I wasn't fully aware of the spectrum of gender and how it affected me and how I wanted to affect the way that people saw me as well. Being identified as feminine a lot throughout my life made it really difficult. So just coming out as non-binary did make a huge difference in regards to my comfort being perceived publicly. But I actually came out a third time, or rather how I refer to it as the second time, when I was 19 as transmasculine. The first time I came out, it went pretty well. I didn't really have any serious backlash. My mom is unfortunately closeted bisexual, but she's not homophobic, so she wasn't judgmental about it. It took her a while for the they them pronouns, but she respected it. in general. My other family, it was a little bit more difficult, like her mom and mostly people in my family that were of like the older generation that weren't native. Um, they had a hard time acknowledging it. But coming out the second time, it was, or rather, like it's the third time. However, when I was 19, coming out was really difficult. I was really, really scared because I didn't really know what it meant to me to be trans yet. I just knew that it was something I identified with. I actually had taken some time to explore my gender identity by myself, like introspective type exploration, and then decided to come out shortly after that. When I came out, I mostly got a lot of acceptance. I have a lot of queer friends already. It's not necessarily something that was new to them, like me being trans. Um, I think it was just hard for some people, honestly, if it's not too much information, specifically the people that were sexually attracted to me as a feminine person. It was difficult for those people to respect that my identity was changing and that I am not associating the way that I had been associating for many years. And even though I kept they, them pronouns and uh, still identify with being an NB, I think a lot of people, when I came out as trans, thought of it as me coming out as binary male. And that made it more difficult, I think. It was really difficult on the level of trying to explain to my family that I wanted to start physically transitioning, you know, that I wanted surgery and to do hormone replacement therapy and talk about other ways to affirm my gender medically and just physically in general, like presentation and stuff. I honestly got an entirely new wardrobe and only kept like some of the things I used to own. Um, I still own some feminine clothes as an androgynous person. I definitely wear both feminine, androgynous, and masculine, like all of the spectrum of clothing, even though I don't think clothing should have a gender. Um, but I started wearing more masculine clothing so that people outwardly would start to respect my pronouns more. I did realize that was some uh, kind of minimal level of internalized transphobia upon myself to like set this precedent that like I have to pass or look a certain way for people to accept me. And I've not entirely grown past that, but for the most part, I don't think about it as much. It's not something I'm prioritizing. But I think it was really difficult for me just because I was really scared that because people might not accept me, that I wouldn't be able to accept myself. Because it's hard to even come to terms with coming out in the first place. I think that letting people know, hey, this is how I identify, and this is how I want you to perceive me differently, like the specific differences, and these are the pronouns I want to use. I think that no matter how difficult it is for us as trans people, it's also difficult for the other cis people in our life to acknowledge that pronoun change is something that should be respected immediately. For a lot of people, it takes them time to start progressing into respecting people's pronouns. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge when people do misgender us, whether or not it's intentional, because a lot of people are really trying and they just don't understand gender enough. I think educational resources could be really helpful for those people. I mean, just Google gender identity.
So when you were coming to terms with your own identity at the age of 15 and then 19, how did you figure stuff out? Like, how did you learn about what it means to be, like bisexual, non-binary, and transmasc?
Well, bisexuality to me was more than obvious just because I have always been attracted to whomever uh, I'm attracted to. It's not limited to gender identity or presentation. It just kind of, like most people's attraction, happens biologically, and it's natural. So it wasn't difficult for me at a young age to know that I was attracted to both people of my gender and people of a different gender. When I was younger, it was more of the broad, I'm attracted to men and women. But learning more about what gender identity is and my own experience with bisexuality, it's just being attracted to people who are either the same or different gender than me. I think that coming out as transmasculine specifically was hard. Like I said, there was like a lot of introspective um, kind of exploration that went into that. I spent a lot of time by myself, just acknowledging gender and how I felt about my body. A lot of my life, I've been in, as I mentioned before, some like severe crippling physical pain. And I never knew that it was associated with dysphoria. And learning that kind of gave me a broader sense of how I can help reduce my own pain and make my lived experience better, so to speak. Since coming out as trans, I definitely have felt far less self-conscious and far more confident and comfortable just existing, just being, like, not, around any specific subgroup of people. I do feel especially accepted around other queer people, but in general, I just feel more comfortable being out in public and around people as who I am. I don't feel as uncomfortable correcting people on my pronouns anymore either. That was something I was really, really timid about at first. Like, I didn't know how to tell people they were wrong because I just saw it as that, just telling them, you're wrong. But it's more about what's right for me than telling people that they're wrong.
I've heard other students say something similar, that it's difficult to correct people
Yeah.
when they're being misgendered.
I think something that's helped personally is my partner. My partner corrects people for me when I don't. Or, for example, when we go out to eat or to a bar or something, he'll automatically, when the wait staff or bartender is coming to serve us, refer to me as he, him from the beginning of our visit, just so that they refer to me correctly from the start. Because sometimes people don't just get it by looking at me, and I understand that. I'm not, again, trying to pass, just trying to be me. But I think that other people, specifically cisgendered people, helping me with correcting has made me far more comfortable with correcting. Because there's a way you can go about it that's not like rude. Just like I was saying, sensing whether or not someone's misgendering you out of sheer ill will or if they just are making a mistake. It's kind of important to make that difference and also to make the distinction between the way you correct them, like whether or not you want to be rude about it and stuff, because some people will intentionally misgender you, and by all means you have every right to pop off when that happens, but like sometimes people just make mistakes and there's not really any reason to be snappy about it. Just correct them and move on. Hopefully they get it right next time.
So if you were in a classroom and another student misgendered you, what would you hope that other students or the professor would do in that context?
Well, like I said, for the most part, I feel comfortable correcting people now. So I would likely say, hey, just so you know, I use he, they pronouns if referred to as she or her or something like that. In regards to, like you're mentioning, how it would be helpful if other students or, the teacher or something. For example, like if the professor misgendered me, that's a whole nother thing. That goes to the dean. But usually you can have a conversation with a student, and typically professors from my experience in an online setting, will be very receptive to advocating for you if you let them know, like, hey, I'm having a hard time being respected with my pronouns. Can you please help me enforce them? Most professors are very receptive and will be like, oh yes, like of course, on Canvas and Los Rios e-services, there's the option to put your pronouns, which I think makes it really helpful for like online discussion boards, stuff like that. And I always introduce myself at the beginning of class with my pronouns, just in case anyone is wondering, like just to answer the questions, because I definitely will get people asking if I don't just announce it, and I don't mind announcing it. I think that other students that are cis or queer could definitely be supportive and stuff, but unless you have a personal relationship with that trans student, or they've asked you to help them correct pronouns with other people, I don't really feel like it's appropriate to like step in and speak up, because that's up to that person and their comfort level to speak up or ask for assistance speaking up, in my opinion. There are some trans people, however, that would appreciate other people speaking up. I just think from my experience, unless you know the person and, like I said, have a reputation with them, you don't have to be friends, but just a reputation with them, and their pronouns and stuff, like you're certain of their pronouns, then I think it's okay to speak up. But it shouldn't be up to, in my opinion, other students to speak out against people being discriminated. Again, if the professor misgenders you, that goes to the dean, and if it becomes a problem with other students, that also can go to the dean. There's a lot of support on campus, and I know for a fact one of our deans is an ally and queer. So it's definitely not something you have to like worry about here. In other campuses it might be more of a problem, but I wouldn't know.
What ideally do you think a professor could do at the beginning of the semester to make their classroom inclusive of trans and non-binary people, um, especially with regard to pronouns? Are there any practices that you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have a really great answer for this. It's very simple. When the professor introduces themselves, announce their pronouns. If they write their name on a board, put the pronouns next to the name in parentheses. Acknowledge, even as a cis person, your own pronouns so that other people can know that when they want their pronouns acknowledged, that you'll be receptive. That is the most basic way you can be an ally, is put your pronouns in your bio, put your pronouns next to your name, announce your pronouns when you introduce yourself. Like, it normalizes people having to announce their pronouns whether or not you're trans. And again, it makes you know that those people announcing their pronouns are more receptive to you announcing your pronouns in return. Like, it kind of just is a way of being like, hey, I'll hear you out, or hey, I can see that, my identity isn't the only identity in this classroom. And I think it's really important. Another really basic way, which should not be done unless you are truly an ally, is wear ally pins or have ally gear in your classroom, like a trans pride flag, a regular gay pride flag. I mean, even if you are queer yourself or identify with any sort of queer identity, put your own pride flag in the classroom. That's also a great way to acknowledge identities, because there is a lot of intersectionality in classrooms, not just sexual gender identities, but like you were asking about other points of diversity, ethnicity, race, all that. There's a lot going on in classrooms, and acknowledging the that you accept people that are different than you is the first and most obvious way to show allyship and make queer and trans people more comfortable in classroom settings.
So you're going to be in person in the fall at Sac City for the first time. What do you think it would feel like to you if you walked into a classroom on the first day or the second day and a professor actively sort of shared their pronouns and tried to kind of convey to students the importance of respecting pronouns? What would it mean, like, emotionally to you?
I personally might cry. I'm a waterworks type of person. I get really, really emotional about stuff like that. Just because it's not something that's common. The more common it becomes, I feel like the less emotional impact it'll have on me. The reason it emotionally impacts me so much is because of the negative stigma surrounding it. The fact that it's not normalized, it hurts me that the thing that they're doing is the exception or is rare. It shouldn't be. And that's what causes me to get emotional about it. But I think it would be very affirming. It would cause extreme solidarity to walk into a classroom and see a pride flag, or have the professor announce their pronouns, or even again have them written on a board or in their bio. Like I said, that's an option too. Not just for social media, for e-services as well, Canvas, all that. But I think it would be I would think it'd be more than affirming, actually. It would open up a dialogue between me or other trans and queer students with the professor, to feel comfortable talking about transness, queerness, all those good things, sexuality, whatever you want to talk about. The more relevant it is to the class, obviously, the more likely the professor is to talk to you about it. Fortunately, here on campus, we do have some courses that are centralized around sexuality, like human sexuality psychology course and other queer educational courses on campus, that the Pride Center has gone above and beyond to make sure that we have these resources. Not many campuses have queer specified classes where they teach you about gender identity, sexuality, that kind of stuff. And if they do, it's always very broad. I've even had courses that weren't specific to the intersectionality that I experienced that still touched base on it, just because it's relevant in so many fields. I think it's really, really important that if they do that and students come to them after that being done, that they are 100% receptive. Like I said, the allyship flags and pins and stuff like that, if you're going to wear it, make sure that you're actually going to kind of hold up the responsibility that it takes to be an ally. Because if somebody comes to you like, hey, I'm struggling, or I'm dealing with this and that, and you're not able to help them or willing to provide resources, and yet you're going to wear that pin, I feel like it's kind of a slap in the face. I've noticed some medical professionals wear pride pins. It was actually the Progress pride pins that they were wearing, and then they're still mistreating trans people in the medical field and stuff like that. And it's really unfortunate, but I think that people that are really going to hold up that responsibility of allyship should embrace it, and they should display it, like make it obvious that you give a crap. I think that's really important, because people caring is what allows us to survive.
So being an ally takes some learning and effort. Yes,
yeah. Being an ally isn't just I accept trans and queer people. It's actually showing support when trans and queer people around you are struggling and ask for help. Whether or not that's personal support, just providing resources is support. But if you can't provide that support, I don't think you should rep allyship personally. I find it counterproductive in the simplest terms.
Yeah, you have to know how to be an ally to be an ally. And you
Yeah.
have to commit to being an ally.
Yeah, it's a real responsibility. It's not just all I like this rainbow flag and I'm gonna wear it. It means something to us.
So I got a little ahead of myself. All
No
these questions were
problem.
supposed to be a little later, so I'll come back to some of the topic of the classroom in other ways a little
Sure.
later. But you mentioned, if it's okay, you stepping back a second, the physical pain of dysphoria, and I don't know that people are familiar with that. Is there anything you can elaborate on when you say that?
So my physical pain with dysphoria had to do with a lot of anxiety. Excuse me. A lot of anxiety that I would experience due to the dysphoria. And that anxiety would come on in physical symptoms. Those symptoms would vary, but I've had symptoms from cold shakes and sweats to vomiting until I cannot breathe. There's a lot of different types of experiences that come with gender dysphoria, and it comes with, like, the difference of those experiences come with the different types of gender dysphoria, because obviously everybody is going to have their own personal idea of what dysphoria feels and looks like. For a lot of people, there is like a shared idea that it's just like this part of your body that does not belong, essentially, but to the point where it's like an extent that it's silly or outrageous that you have that part of your body. And my personal experience with dysphoria had a lot to do with my reproductive system, and it would cause me to be fully incapacitated some days because of cramping, shaking, migraines, severe migraines. Dysphoria has kind of affected me in the way that severe illness would like affect anybody else. And I mean, it is a severe illness when it goes untreated. But essentially you could look at it as it would just make me sick, just really, really sick. And there wasn't really a solution until I figured out the causality of it. Because when you're trying to treat an illness that just seems like physical illness and you don't really know the source, and there's no virus, there's no bacteria, you know, there's not really something that's signaling to your body that you're sick. Figuring out that source is the first step to treating the illness. And for me, my treatment didn't start until shortly after I came out when I was 19. And I was only lucky enough to get the care that I got because of the supportive resources that I had at the time, pointing me in the direction of One Community Health downtown, which is a community-based clinic where they don't turn anyone away, and they specifically specialize in trans-affirming care. But yeah, I don't think that I even understood or comprehended the extent of, like, ill that my dysphoria was making me. I didn't know until after I started getting treatment, like, that it wasn't just a normal part of my life to just be in pain and be ill all the time. But since I started treatment, that those feelings have essentially minimized, if not completely vanished, which is a really fantastic thing to report.
I think that's important for people to know about the sort of the kind of psychological as well as physical impact of gender dysphoria and what it means, right, to deny people access to care.
Or even to deny yourself the care because you don't have the proper education to know it exists. That was my experience. I didn't even know that being trans was a thing until I turned 15 when I came out. And once I learned more about it, I realized how much I truly identified with it. But that experience wasn't something I had acknowledged until a later point in my life. And once acknowledging that, I kind of noticed my problems starting to solve themselves, so to speak. Not to say I did not put a lot of effort into getting the care and maintaining the care, because it's shots weekly that I administer myself, and maintaining it's a lot. But once I got that care, it was like almost immediately within the first couple of months of getting hormone replacement therapy, I started to feel my illness go away. Like I didn't feel ill anymore.
That's good.
I actually stopped taking antidepressants. I've been on testosterone for 2 years, and I stopped taking antidepressants about 7 months ago because I felt steady.
That's great.
Yeah. I think that they were treating me for depression because of my dysphoria. It's very, very common that people with gender dysphoria will get misdiagnosed even multiple times over, treated for BPD, bipolar, anxiety, depression, some even treated for OCD because of compulsions. I mean, I actually am compulsive, but some trans people will be misidentified as compulsive for the way that they have outbursts or tics in regards to little things like the way they dress. A lot of trans people have like little fiddle things, like they'll play with their hair all the time or be worried about the way their nails look, stuff like that. Some people, most cis people, aren't overly conscious about. But those things will be identified as compulsion disorder.
So another question about religion. Did religion play a role in your life growing up at all?
Yeah, religion was a really big part of my childhood. My mom had the great opportunity to live with my grandma while she went to college. Little to no rent, just make sure that you're going and continuing your school, taking care of the baby. The one condition that she made, like the only rule, was that my mom had to go back to church. I was raised Christian, very modern Western Christianity, nothing traditional. My mom and I used to go every week when I was little, and I even did those like summer Bible camp out things. My son actually did one this year, but we don't attend church regularly. My grandma just wanted him to go and offered to pay, so it's a fun thing for kids. I don't think it's too bad, and him and I had to talk about what I think and believe, and he understands that I don't believe in Jesus, and he's okay with that. He doesn't know what to believe yet. Like, he's still kind of deciding that. But yeah, we went to church every week. I was part of choir for many, many years. We did a lot of extra stuff at the church. My mom was a middle school youth pastor, supervisor type situation. For a while, we had some like bad experiences at the church we went to. Specifically, like my mom got cursed out by one of the middle schoolers, and then I unfortunately got physically assaulted by one of the pastors, his wife. kind of grabbed my wrist. It was like during a performance, she was trying to get me to a building when I had my mom's explicit permission to meet her after the performance. And instead of letting me go, she grabbed my arm and bruised me and stuff. It was extremely inappropriate. But because of those two experiences happening kind of within a week of each other, we just stopped going to church very suddenly. Um, and I think that has a lot to do with the reason why I don't do as much pagan or Wiccan practices as I would honestly like to. I've been trying to get back into it on my own terms, but because completely divergent religion was kind of forced upon me at a young age, I was kind of torn away from my current and like what I believe to be my truth, like not just in regards to religion, but just my truth for this experience in life. Um, and I think that because it like kind of set me off on a different path, and I wasn't really sure about these beliefs that were being pursued by me and my family, it made it harder for me to kind of realize what I actually do believe. And like I mentioned earlier, it's just that like everything is all one whole thing, like at energy. There's nothing different between a person and a person, a person and a pen, a rock and like water is the same as us. I mean, we are 70% water, but when it comes down to like scientifics, it's my religion is more based in fact than belief. Just on, all molecules are truly the same. The belief part that comes with it is the energy behind the molecules, essentially. But a lot of what I do is, what is the word? I don't know why I can't. Alchemaic. A lot of the practices in my religion they're alchemaic, so they have physical properties and very rigid, but like specific rules and guidelines for like practice in regards to like, for example, the thing I do the most, full moon rituals or sage or other type of like burning cleansings, stuff like medicinal jars, which can literally just look like putting a bunch of herbs in a jar and then sealing it for good luck. Uh, it's medicinal in the way that if you were to add alcohol, it could be a potent tincture. But usually medicinal jars for my particular practice are just jars full of herbs that are sealed. It's not, I don't make tinctures. It's a complicated process that I'm not that great at. But stuff like that, like there's always a physical side to the spiritual practice. And it kind of binds spirit and body. And that's like the whole point of the practice that I do, is kind of just to be more in touch with oneself and surroundings.
So, growing up, did religion sort of influence your thinking around gender and sexuality, and did it sort of shape your coming out experience at all?
I don't know if it shaped my coming out experience, but it definitely affected the way that I view sexuality and gender. Maybe gender a little less than sexuality, but still gender, just in the way that Christianity does instill that, like, the man is the working man and the woman is the caregiving woman, and that kind of dynamic is just normalized. Not that it's like an agenda that's pushed or something that they're like, you have to do this. But if you deviate or do anything that's like different from that, they do look down upon it. But like the thing about Christianity that I've noticed is even if they will vocally express their non-belief, or rather conflict with your beliefs, they'll still let you do what you're going to do. Most Christians are like not as confrontational as, for example, the Catholic side of my family that I've experienced. Just the difference of the religious belief has started and stopped conversations. Like full halt, like no more conversation because I am not willing to perceive what you're saying to me type stubbornness. And it's not limited to religion. I just commonly people of that religion will be that way from my experience. I think it's something that's weird because growing up Christian, it's like you're taught that anything you do that is not approved by your parents, not approved by elders of the church or pastors, etc., like not just approved by society in general as a sin, even if it's not a sin. And I think that like really shaped the way I see sexuality, as well as some traumatic experiences that I had that solidified those beliefs of it being sin.
So did religion influence how your family responded to your queerness?
Absolutely for all of my family except for my mom, because she doesn't really have a belief or practice that's solidified anymore. Like since she stopped going to church, she doesn't like do one specific thing or believe one specific thing. I mean, I know she believes in energy the way I do, but she doesn't like have a religion, and she's not atheist either. Like it's a little confusing because that made it easier for her to be more receptive towards my coming out. But like my grandma is Christian, and my other side, my mom's brother and the other side of the family, they're all Catholic, and then my dad's side, they're Mormon. So it was really difficult. I don't even talk to my dad's side of the family anymore. And unfortunately, it's like that for a lot of trans people. But the reason I don't talk to them doesn't have to do with my transness. It has to do with personal boundaries, which in turn are not mutually exclusive by any means. But the boundaries that I had to set didn't have to do with me being trans. I actually came out after those boundaries were set. But I can imagine it how difficult it would be fathomable to come out to that side of the family. Like I would imagine that they might hurt me even. Like I'm not entirely sure, but there's a lot that goes behind the way that people view transness and queerness in regards to their religion. And it's sad to say, but some religions are not accepting at all of trans or queerness. But it definitely affected the way my grandma and I interact. She tried to pray my transness away. She actually sat down and had a conversation with me, trying to like convince me that what I was doing was harmful to my body. And I had to tell her, all the harm I was experiencing with my body and my mind without doing these things. She still doesn't agree with what I'm doing, but she like respects me and calls me by my preferred name and pronouns to my face. But I have been told, and it's like confirmed by multiple people, not just my mom, but like my partner and other family members have told me she doesn't respect me behind my back. Like she'll still refer to me as my dead name and with the wrong pronouns. And it's not that she's not trying, because it's like you have to put an effort to be respectful to somebody's face like that if you're not doing it elsewhere. I feel like it would be harder to, in a mind, kind of separate one's dead name and previous identity with one's trans identity, like, because she probably sees it as like two different people. I've had particular one of my closest friends, who is no longer a friend with me, come out to me after I came out about his transphobia towards the fact that he couldn't like realize that I'm one person. Like, he was separating who I used to be into a whole nother persona, and it turned into a huge argument that I do not regret ending abruptly. But it's interesting to think, because that's probably how she conceptualizes it and why she refers to me in two different ways. Um, and I mean, I know for some trans people, it's like that, like they have two different pronouns in the way that they prefer certain pronouns in school or business or like public setting, or and they have different pronouns at home and with family and stuff. Like something, my mom is a middle school teacher now. Something that she teaches in, because she's a science teacher, she teaches in sex ed and gender education and stuff, is that she, as your teacher, because you're a minor in this situation, she does not have the legal right to tell anybody else what you tell her your preferred pronouns are. So, like, if you're in her classroom and you're like, hey, my preferred pronouns are they, them, but you still use she, her, or he, him pronouns at home, my mom, as the authoritative position she has to refer to you with the pronouns that you prefer in the classroom setting, in the classroom, and then refer to you differently to your family if you request such action to be taken. Because some kids aren't safe to come out to their families, or just don't feel comfortable. It's not the time yet. Sometimes coming out in certain places is easier than coming out in other places. Like, for example, the religion thing definitely makes a difference. Like, it definitely was easier to come out to my mom, and even easier to come out to my grandma than even, like I said, thinking about coming out to my dad's side of the family. And it was definitely easier than the Catholic side of my family. But it definitely shaped and affected the way I even approached my family about coming out. Because it was nerve-wracking, not just on the, like, it's scary because they might not want to accept me or like have me in their life anymore, but just it was scary for me because my family is really educated and science-based. I had to like explain why this medical treatment was necessary to my family, and that made it more difficult, like completely separate from religion and stuff, just having to justify it scientifically and medically. That was a whole nother thing, and I did do my research before I started care, but it was difficult for me to have to relay all this new information I just learned to my family, who has no idea about why it is that I even want to do this, let alone what it is. I got some really weird reactions from my grandma when she read the symptom sheet, like the things you'll experience from taking testosterone. She audibly said yuck when she read the clitoral enlargement bit. And I thought that was funny because she's just traditional and she never would think why somebody would want that. Like, because she couldn't imagine as a woman wanting a phallus. It's just not something that she even comprehends is a desire that some might have. But yeah, I thought that was kind of funny because in explaining, had to show them all these documents and all this stuff, and she's just reading. She's yuck while she's reading, and it's like, thanks, Grandma. I'm glad you think I'm yuck.
That's where the filter comes in.
Yeah, yeah. But no, I explained to her, and she was like somewhat receptive. She didn't understand why, but I still was like, this is something I want, like I'm pursuing this. Like, I know what I'm doing. It's not like this is something that's going to happen to me and I'm going to be surprised. Wouldn't that be funny though? And like, informed consent for for hormone replacement care, and just all of a sudden you just start growing body hair, and you're like, what is this? Like, jeez. But that's why informed consent is a thing, because they go over all the little details and any questions you might have before you actually sign the documents and get the care started. And in some states, a psychological evaluation is still required. Here in California, there's many medical practices that don't require it. They just need a sound history of gender dysphoria in your medical record. And that can look for trans men like extreme cramps and bleeding. For trans women, that can look like chest pains from not having breasts. That's actually a really common physical symptom. And there's really easy ways to treat these. It's just, they're so simple, it's overly complicated to receive. Hormone replacement therapy has been used by cisgender people for many years. Puberty blockers for kids who start their puberty at like 8, 9 years old. They've been used on cisgendered kids for longer than we even like have data to have collected them being used. It's not something that's new. It's just the approach is different, and the informed consent is really important for anybody seeking the care because of how different it is. Like there could be some unexpected things. I definitely learned stuff from my informed consent that I had no idea about before. Personally, my favorite thing is the voice change. I had extreme voice dysphoria, and even like being in choir, like I mentioned previously, that enhanced it because I, sung femininely. But my voice has dropped multiple levels on the 2 years that I've been on it. And that's probably the most exciting part for me, and it's the most noticeable part I think for people experiencing it from an outside perspective. Like, especially if you don't talk to me for like some months and then all of a sudden we're talking again, you hear my voice. It's always deeper every time. I think it's really cool. It's a cool experience.
Yeah, I found over the course of this interview project that it asked some trans people if they want to be interviewed who want hormone replacement therapy but haven't been able to access it yet. And so that's a tricky thing in part about this project, because I've had people tell me they don't want to be interviewed because of their dysphoria around their voice.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. I did mention earlier One Community Health. I mean, that is where I would send anybody looking for gender affirming care. You don't have to have insurance. They have a sliding scale program, and they will not turn anybody away. Like, they even have urgent care. They don't have an ER, but they do have urgent care and primary care. I think they have dental and vision too, actually. But
So does the Gender Health Center in Sacramento also provide some of that care?
off the record, the Gender Health Center is racist. I don't promote them anymore. I found out about One Community Health through them, and I used to get supplies and do the needle exchange there, make regular donations. They, a year ago, maybe a little longer than a year now, fired 4 trans Black individuals just because they were Black, or one was not Black, one was person of color as well, but it was all racial based termination, and it was really unfortunate because the one person who was my friend who this happened to was one of the lead advocates. Like, the only reason I got the care I needed is because of her, and it was really messed up. I went to interview her about the Gender Health Center for my own project. And my heart broke because she messaged me back and she was just like, yeah, actually, like, don't go there. Don't promote them. Like, this happened to me and 3 other of my coworkers. And I'll tell you about that, but I'm not willing to interview about the advocacy program. And I was like, that's totally understandable. But
yeah, it's really disappointing.
Yeah, I don't recommend them. The harm reduction program they have, that's free, great. Harm reduction at Gender Health Center, fantastic. We love harm reduction centers, but there is a level of like racism that I think people can come back from, and that's just not one of them. There's like, that's just inexcusable in my experience, because if you're gonna terminate someone's job, you have to have a real reason. Like, the unfortunate thing about it is those employees didn't have the legal support because they were fired from the advocacy program, so they couldn't pursue it. But yeah, One Community Health is where the Gender Health Center will send people for gender affirming care if they don't provide it themselves. But One Community Health is in downtown on in between 20th and 21st on O. It's right across the street from Henry's Lounge, which is also a great place to get burgers. But they have all-inclusive care. They have their own pharmacy right there on site. Typically, you can get seen same day if you go early enough in the day. They definitely have a walk-in STI screening clinic. If you go before, I think it's like 10 a.m., you can walk in and ask to be screened, and they'll put you in for an appointment that day. You just might have to wait around a while. And the cool thing about the screening there that I personally like is they do not insist on swabbing you themselves. They will allow you to administer the swab yourself. To me, that's really important. It's not as important to everybody. Some people are comfortable with doctors doing their job. I have a lot of trauma with doctors, so it's really convenient when they're like, hey, here, you do the test, or hey, here, you give yourself the shot, or whatever. It makes me far more comfortable because I trust myself. There's very few doctors that I trust. Fortunately, UC Davis is also mostly trans competent in their care. That's where I got my surgery. And that's where my previous primary care provider is now working. He himself is a trans individual, and he specializes in trans care. But they still have plenty of doctors at One Community Health that were trained by him, that were his colleagues, and that are all trans competent and able to provide gender affirming care and referrals outward for things that they can't do in clinic, like surgeries and other stuff like that, like specialty care. But I have been advocated for more in the past 2 years at One Community Health than I have in the past 23 years of my life at any other clinic. Not just because I was a child and I'm very young, but also just due to the fact that the people at this clinic will bend over backwards to make sure that you are seen and heard. Whether or not they're actually able to provide the care depends on the thing that you're asking for and if it's within their pay grade to provide. Some things are outside of their pay grade, but they will still give you resources to get the care elsewhere. Like I said, outside referrals for specialty care, etc. There is a program at the clinic. It's a advocacy, gender affirming program that is run by a really, really awesome person that I'm constantly in close communication with because I have a lot of health issues. And they help me with everything, anything I need. I call them freaking out sometimes, and they'll hold space for me to just explain what it is that I'm going through and having a medical block with, because a lot of the things I deal with is just pushing through the system to make sure that the care I'm getting is received. But they just do more than they're probably paid for. In all honesty, I'm sure they're paid well, but what they do is worth more than money. And it's really important to me to talk about One Community Health because the fact that I, since receiving care from them, have stopped having suicidal ideations altogether. I have had them my entire life before One Community Health, and since receiving the care and actually knowing that my healthcare providers are listening to me when I'm saying I'm having a problem, and knowing that my existence and medical issues, whether it be illness or surgery or whatever, isn't a burden to them. I'm not asking too much just to get the care I need, has made a huge impact and difference on my own self-worth and my own idea of my value. Because I'll be really honest, healthcare providers, especially telling you that you're psychotic because you have gender dysphoria, or that you're only depressed and we can only treat your depression because you have gender dysphoria, and them not actually hearing what the real problem is and just dismissing it, it feels very negating. It messes with the way that you acknowledge your need to ask for help. And a big thing that I've learned from being trans, and a big part of my personal trans experience, is acknowledging that I will likely always need help. Asking for that help is much more difficult than acknowledging that, but I'm at least able to acknowledge it.
So the next section is about disability. Do you feel comfortable talking about your disabilities and how they impact you educationally?
I'm comfortable with talking about my current diagnosed disability, but I don't really want to go into detail about my hypermobility and that stuff. It's just been stressful. I've been working on figuring out what it is.
Sure. Yeah.
We think it's EDS, and I'm I have an appointment with geneticist this month and next month. But yeah, it's just been years process trying to figure out why my joints just dislocate randomly. That's the most detail. But I'll definitely talk about my CPTSD and DSPS, stuff like that.
Okay, so what are your disabilities, and sort of what kind of accommodations do you look for, or have you found that you've needed in college or just in school in general?
So I'm currently diagnosed with CPTSD. I've had multiple different mental impairment diagnoses over the years, but that's the one that's stuck. It's treatable, but it's not usually a disability that people heal from. You, for the most part, end up just having to live with it. There are those rare cases where you get the proper treatment and it no longer affects you on a day-to-day in a really negative way, but it's rare that people of extreme childhood abuse and neglect will even find love or happiness in their life, unfortunately. There's a lot of studies I've been looking into about my diagnosis. Since I received it, I was really confused. I went for ADHD testing, and they were like, good news, you don't have ADHD, but we have some worse news for you. And I got my diagnosis 18 days after I turned 20, I think, was when I was diagnosed. 'Cause it was in March, shortly after my birthday. And it came to me as a shock, a really big shock, because I, in acknowledging the diagnosis, had to acknowledge that my mother is abusive, and had to acknowledge that the trauma I experienced from a sexual assault that I went through wasn't the only trauma I experienced. And I started to have to process that essentially my entire childhood was traumatic. And that was hard to like come to terms with because it wasn't something that I had ever even like thought about in that way. Like I just thought my childhood was normal. Like I thought, I guess I thought I had the normal amount of rage, so to speak, to quote She-Hulk. It was weird for me to sit there and be like, okay, well, the reason why I have such struggles in my daily life is because of all the stuff that I went through. And the unfortunate part of my diagnosis is I can't change anything that I went through. I can only change my perspective on it and how I hold myself moving forward. Um, I used to have really, really bad episodes, which would look like me dissociating to the point where I wasn't present. I was, in my past, and I couldn't really differentiate between what reality was and what my hallucinations were. I used to have really severe episodes, and it used to be really bad. Like I couldn't hold a job or remember to do self care. Like as simple as like forgetting to shower for like some weeks because the physical symptoms I'm going through took up all of my energy and all of my time. And like it was the only priority. Like I couldn't prioritize anything else because it was the only thing I was doing. I was just trying to survive. And I was misdiagnosed with epilepsy when I was 13. And for 5 years, I was on, nearly 5 years, I was on seizure medication, which in turn messed with my kind of my mental state because the seizure medication I was on was also a anti-anxiety med that can affect depression if you already have it. So I was taking it thinking that it was stopping these seizures, which were really just dissociative episodes due to my PTSD. And I was taking it thinking it was stopping these things from happening, but it didn't truly make a difference. I was just on a medication for a really long time. They had me on other medications for other diagnoses like depression. I was on antipsychotics for a short period of time, like a month and a half. They had me on Seroquel, which was awful. You shouldn't do medications like that. Like psychiatrists shouldn't prescribe medications like that unless they're certain that the person with those symptoms is truly experiencing that disability, because that kind of set my treatment progress back when I did that. But as far as accommodations go, I don't need many. I sit in the back of the classroom by the door. Sometimes the door isn't in the back of the classroom, so if it's not, uh, that'll depend on my comfort level with the people in the classroom. The biggest thing is I just don't like people behind me. I've a thing where if there's somebody behind me, my brain tells me they're going to attack me because of my previous experiences, and I don't know the difference. I mean, somebody I love could be standing behind me, like somebody I love and trust with my life could be standing behind me, and it will still trigger me to go into this like defensive mode. So I just don't like people behind me. But being close to the door is also important because I have accommodation for if I have a panic attack, I'm allowed to like step out of the classroom. And that can look like anything like me leaving for the rest of the day or me leaving, taking some deep breaths and coming back in. And that's up to my own discretion. Obviously, as a college student, I pay to be here. The professors aren't forcing me to be here. It's not like attendance is as mandatory as it is in grade school. But I know that there are a certain amount of absences still only allowed per class before you get dropped. And so I am allowed to leave the classroom, but it's slightly limited in the way that I still have to respect the professor's time. But if I'm having symptoms and there's an episode or something severe is happening to me physically, I'm not in a state to be around other students or in a classroom. I would just be a distraction, which is why I'm allowed to leave. Because it helps not only the other students stay focused in class, but then it helps me be able to do what I need to cope with whatever it is I'm dealing with in that moment and be able to come back to class. The only other accommodation I have is additional test taking time. I think I get 1.5 times test taking time, and the test taking center, I don't have to take tests in the classroom. I'm allowed to go to the testing center that the Disability Services provides to students who are disabled for a quieter, calmer, less occupied testing space. Usually there, might be a couple other students in there, but it's not like a classroom full of people, and it reduces test taking anxiety for me. So I'm like allowed to use that center as I need. But I believe it's something you have to set up ahead of time. Like you have to have the accommodation, yes, but like I don't believe I can be in a classroom trying to take a test and then leave to go take the test elsewhere. I don't believe that's part of my accommodation, but I'm not certain. But I want to say that's not allowed for like cheating reasons. Like they wouldn't want you to be in the middle of the test and stop taking it for any reason, not just for accommodations. But I feel like I'd have to check with DSPS about that and what the limits are on that. But if I ask for it ahead of time, I'm allowed to go take my test in the test.
Yeah, faculty can be flexible too.
Yeah, and it also professor discretion as well, because some professors are way more strict about what they think is like cheating and plagiarism versus other professors who are like, oh, like, I don't want to use the word lax, but for lack of a better phrase, they're more lax about it.
You could also say trusting.
Yeah, trusting. Yeah, like they believe in your own integrity, and I think that can be really important too in an academic setting, not just, to feel like you know what you're doing, but to feel like the professor believes in you and thinks you know what you're doing. It's affirming too, like just in its own separate thing, because it's like, oh hey, like I'm a good student, makes you feel like you're doing something right.
Is there anything you can think of that, like, so do you think that the campus, that faculty can do more to accommodate students with disabilities or understand the students with disabilities?
There is only one thing that comes to mind when you ask me that, and it's I understand like confidentiality stuff, and like what is appropriate and what's not appropriate. But for students going through like a medical crisis or something that, like a disability flare up, so to speak, like something that increases their lack of ability in the academic standpoint. I mean, whether that even just be something as simple as honestly addiction, and not trying to start talking about that as a whole nother conversation, but just as a generalization of something that needs to be understood more as a disease and a medical crisis. But professors, the thing that I personally think could help is if they were more willing to listen to personal details, because there's not always availability to talk to counselors. You can seek it, and then you don't always get a counselor as soon as you need one. And something that I don't believe is in professors' pay grade, but something that I think would be really helpful, especially to students like myself who are disabled, is if professors are willing to hold space, whether that be like a Zoom meeting, like how you ask a professor for a Zoom meeting if you have a question in the course, like the same type of thing, like a Zoom meeting to just discuss how your situation is affecting your academic progress and make plans to succeed still. Because I think it's really important. Some professors are already more than willing to do that. I just know that, again, for confidentiality reasons, some are like not willing to discuss personal matters whatsoever. And I think that as far as like being supportive goes, just being able to listen to somebody does make a huge difference.
Yeah, listening is different than prying, right? And also listening is different than sharing somebody's personal details with other people.
Yeah, well, and that's what I'm saying. So, like, if a student wants to share those details with their professor, the professor should be able to, if they have the mental capacity and spoons, like we were discussing earlier privately, if they have the space to hold, they should hold that space. I am bringing this up because recently, without naming names, a professor of mine shut down the idea of me discussing any details about my situation, even though it was affecting my academic progress. And that affected me a little bit mentally because I felt like this professor didn't care, or like wasn't willing to listen. Like I was saying, like just listening makes a huge difference. And I know it's not that the professor didn't care, it's just it's hard to not take it personally and interpret it that way, even though it's meant as a professional courtesy. Like, it made sense, the reasons that they gave, why, if we could edit that, like that the professor gave for not wanting to discuss those things. But it still personally affected me and made me feel less important.
Yeah, I mean, I think when students feel like their professors care about them as human beings, that helps them feel more kind of like interested in doing well in the classroom. You know?
Yeah. Well, and my goal as a student isn't just success. Like, I actually want to learn. I think that if I fail a class, as long as I've learned something from it, it was still a success. As much as financial aid doesn't like that mindset, I think it's really important from a college experience that you're just learning each semester. And I mean, I've had the variety of professors that bend over backwards to give you letters of recommendation and advocate for you to get certain supportive services. I mean, I even had a professor help me with my housing crisis when I was living in my vehicle, like give me resources to find housing. And I know certain professors just have more mental capacity, more space to hold for students that are struggling. I just think that what I'm saying is that professors, even if they don't have that space to hold, is that acknowledging when a student is struggling and like just being able to say, you know, hey, I see you struggling does make a huge difference, especially if you're willing to still plan for success in regards to those struggles. Like I said, I've had the range of professors. One professor, a semester, I was going to fail. Like it was not even questionable. I was definitely going to fail because of where I was at, missing assignments, stuff like that. I fell behind because I got overwhelmed with a mental crisis that I had that semester in my housing situation. And this professor went out of their way to give me extra space, extra time, not just extensions on assignments, but like actually like sitting down with me, going through my assignments that I hadn't turned in and letting me know if they were meeting the requirements to be turned in late. Because they were being turned in late, she wanted me to, the professor wanted me to get the best score I could get on those assignments. So instead of grading them after submission, the professor would review them before I submitted them, and then I would still get some points docked because it was late, but it was like extra help. And then this course had a support course with it, so there was a mentor professor as well who also gave me time and reviewed my assignments, so I wasn't missing a beat. And I ended up passing with a C in that course, even though it was like certain failure, because they didn't give up on me. And I was really dedicated to still trying. Because that's one thing about me that, for better or for worse, I don't give up. I'm not a quitter. It's not something that I do very often, and the only time I do is when something is breaching my boundaries, like, and then it's a boundary limit. It's not quitting, if that makes sense. It's a little different.
So, do you think your disability shape your experiences as a queer and trans person, and vice versa?
Um, I think that being uh, disabled doesn't necessarily shape my queerness and transness, but my queerness and transness like definitely affects my disability. I am unfortunately of the thorough belief that if I'd have known and come out sooner, that I might not have my current diagnosis, because a lot of the trauma I experienced wasn't from direct abuse. It was from indirect neglect and a lack of acceptance in my family life. A lot of the abuse I experienced was psychological. Uh, Me being forced to present as a gender I'm not for many, many years. The physical symptoms of dysphoria that I experienced, that for most of my experience, my family and people around me would tell me that it's not that big of a deal to just, you know, just live through it, like strap your boots up, so to speak. But I don't think that being disabled shapes my queerness in any way. But I think being queer affects my disability just in the way that I believe that it might have been a huge source and catalyst of my current diagnosis. Um, they're not at all mutually exclusive things, and I think that both of them build upon one another. But I don't think that my disability shapes my identity in the way of speaking of like gender and sexual identity. It's just a separate part of my identity.
What about like experiences with how people treat you in the world? Like, and thinking about yourself as a whole person, right? Rather than thinking specifically about like disability and queerness at that intersection specifically, but like how just sort of, it's you walking around in the world and you have disabilities and you also are queer and trans. How do you think about it in that way, I guess?
Well, I do experience a lot of discrimination. It used to be worse. Because I advocate for myself so much now, it's not something that it's not something I struggle with so much anymore. It's something that in turn actually kind of liberates me when people are discriminatory, just in the way that I feel an opportunity to help educate people. Not by all means, most trans people don't feel that way. And by any means, it's not our responsibility to educate people. I just like to do that. Like, it makes me happy to make people see the connections, and like when the neurons are firing in the light behind their eyes, they understand. I love that moment, and that's why I like explaining. But I've been discriminated against for being disabled, for being trans, for being queer, for multiple of those things at once. The biggest thing that I deal with discrimination isn't even misgendering and like gender presentation stuff. It's actually my disability. I deal with the most discrimination in regards to that because it's not a visible disability. I am not, from an outside perspective, easily clocked as disabled. And when I start talking about my disability, it not only brings out the ableists I've noticed, but it also, excuse me, makes me realize that a lot of people have, and it's the same for trans and queerness, they have like a lack of understanding around disability. And that lack of understanding translates into them being like, oh, well, we hear you say you're disabled, but we don't see you being disabled. So we don't actually associate you as disabled because you're mostly able bodied, or you don't like do, things that like autistic people have noticeable quirks. Like you don't have that. Like, and it's really frustrating, especially about mental disability, because there's such a bleak view on what it means to uh, not just be mentally disabled, but to know people that are, um, because people don't acknowledge the wide variety of diagnoses that exist, and how long it's taken for all those diagnoses to become solidified in standard medical practice, and like the psychiatric association, the APA. It's wild to think that just recently in the 70s, what's now known as DID, but what was then known as multiple personality disorder, was like just um, made into an official diagnosis. Like it wasn't a real diagnosis until the 70s.
And what does DID stand for?
Dissociative identity disorder. It's multiple personality disorder. They just gave it a new name, but it means the same thing. And it's wild to think about that. But there's so many mental impairments and disabilities that still aren't acknowledged. And one that was another somewhat recent, BPD, borderline personality disorder, was somewhat recent. I think it was late 80s, early 90s. I could be wrong on that off the top of my head. But that one is a more recent one too. And a lot of people who had BPD before, same with people who had DID, were misdiagnosed with schizophrenia. Like, it was a common misdiagnosis because instead of, hearing, oh, there's multiple people living in my brain, they just heard I hear voices and would categorize it as schizophrenia right off the bat. That or just depressive disorder. If, the patient wasn't quite open about hearing voices. But I know people with DID and BPD, and they have confirmed that it is very much like having more than one person in your mind at a time. Whether or not it's conflicting or one is louder than the other, depends on the patient and their personal experience with the impairment. But I've confirmed with everybody that I know who has it that it's very much, there's more than one voice. It's not just you, it's you and another, and the APA refers to them as alters. But I think it's interesting just on the premise that there are so many more mental impairments and disabilities and symptoms that people experience that could be similar to current things that are already diagnosable and already exist in the book. But there's so many things that people experience that you can't put into words, that are unperceivable from an outside perspective. And I think all those things brought together really kind of gives a clarity on like how little we actually know about what's going on in everybody's head. And I find it really important to learn as much as we can about it. The more we learn, the more we can help people who are struggling with stuff that's going on in their brains.
Okay, can you talk some about your economic class status, how you get by?
Well, I am in poverty. I don't make any money, actually. I have not had a job for nearly 3 years since I've been in college. I had a job at the beginning when I first started college, but it didn't work out because of distance reasons. The place I was working was just too far from where I was sleeping. I am currently on a welfare to work program with the county. And because I have a kid, it's not general assistance, it's called CalWorks. And it's basically just this program where you do work related activities and then they pay you cash aid monthly for you and your kid to survive. And it's not really a good amount of money. It's under $1,000 monthly. Uh, and I am grateful for having it because it's better than having absolutely nothing. But it's definitely not enough to live. We're on housing voucher, Section 8. It's just not called Section 8 anymore. And I pay 40% of the cash aid that the county gives me monthly in rent. So I don't really have money for like gas or anything like that afterwards. Everything that I own and can afford is either one, paid by tax return, two, paid by the school because of financial aid, which I unfortunately haven't been receiving, but I am working on an appeal for that because I do depend on that money. Or scholarships, grants, and loans, aside from like the typical financial aid grants, like other things you can apply for separately. And those are the three main ways that I make income. I mentioned at the very beginning of the interview, I am an artist. The only other way I make money is I do art commissions. I'm a painter, and I very under the table, because I don't make enough for it to be taxed, do self-employ freelance work. I am also a dance teacher. I teach stretch classes, tap classes, contemporary classes at the Sierra Center. I work with Spirit Dancer.
So we left off talking about your class status, and you were talking about some of the assistance that you receive. Was there anything else you wanted to say about that? About like what it's like to get by day to day or week to week?
I'm like trying to just backtrack really quick because I definitely had to take that. But I was talking about how I pay 40% of my income for rent, and that my income is crap. Trying to think where I was going because I know I was going somewhere with it. I can talk more about the welfare to work program. The program's really cool in regards to the way that the school handles it because the school has their own CalWorks program. I was briefly mentioning off camera about the hours. So CalWorks welfare to work program is this program where they give you aid, but you have to do welfare to work activity, which looks like schools, volunteering, internships, etc. Anything that you can do that you can like log the hours for doing that are progress towards getting a job. And there's a minimum hour requirement which you have to meet. But most people in the program, you get like a form every month and you have to individually log your activity hours like on the form. And the program here at the school, through a extensive verification process, helps you fill those forms out so you don't have to stress about getting those forms in on time. You don't have to stress about filling them out monthly. They just log your hours for you. It's probably done on a computer, and they likely just copy paste that information onto the form and submit it to the county. The county will still send you the sheets to fill out. Like, it's very misleading and it will make you think that you don't have your hours logged. But the school does it. They take care of all of it, as long as you have it verified that you're still receiving the aid. They'll log all the hours and do all that for you, and it's just like one less document to worry about monthly. Um, Section 8, it's 40% of the income that I'm getting from the county that I'm paying for rent. So the money that I get from like financial aid, grants, scholarships, loans, etc., like all that kind of stuff does not count as income for Section 8. But like family assistance counts for income through Section 8, and like child support counts for income through Section 8. Anything that's really like taxable income and or family support, like outward, somebody's like helping you and just giving you, a certain amount of money per month, whether it's consistent or not. If you're getting like allotted money monthly from any source, they count that. The reason I think they don't count financial aid is because it's not consistent. It's not monthly. Um, I'm not entirely sure. That's just a speculation. But they count essentially everything else. And I don't currently have child support. I'm in the process of all that paperwork. It's a lot of paperwork. I've had full custody over my son for almost 2 years now, or 2 years in a couple days, because I got him August 12th, 2021. So yeah, I've had him for 2 years and a couple days. But it's not on paper. It's a verbal agreement between the other parent and I, and court filing is just stressful. So it's not something I have like super prioritized. Um, but like, if I do start receiving it, I have to count it towards my Section 8 income, and it will increase my rent. The rent consistently stays at or below 40% of what your income is. And they calculate it based off this thing that's called like a TPP or a TTP or something like that. And it's the tenant portion. I think it's TPP is like tenant payment portion, but it could be TTP, and it's just like all these terminologies and stuff, and they calculate it based off of what the rental amount is for the unit you live in, and then like a percentage, so that they're paying a portion and you're paying a portion, and you're always paying less than 40% of your income.
But if you get a little bit more financial support, then it just has to go towards.
Yes, if I get any more financial support aside from school stuff, I have to report it to the SHRA. And then the SHRA goes in and they redo the calculations based off of my new income and my rent increases. So no matter what I do, if I try to get more money, it's going to be spent, essentially. A portion of it will be spent.
So does financial stress ever make it difficult to concentrate on school?
Definitely. I know without the supportive services that I'm receiving, like the CalWorks program that helps me with my logging of my hours, the EOPS and CARE program, which help me with other grants and stuff aside from financial aid. They used to do like monthly cards, but they're just doing disbursements now for us. And the CARE program is specific for CalWorks recipients, single parents who are on cash aid. It's just a sub program of the EOPS program. Like Next Up is for foster youth, and they just provide additional resources to the students who have unmet need, and those resources look anything like a book voucher to just a grant for books, or just regular grant money to vouchers, like gas vouchers, gift cards for like Walmart, etc. One semester we were monthly receiving $100 Walmart gift cards, which helped tremendously. Like, I do get food stamps on top of my cash aid, but like, you can't get toiletries or dog food or like things that aren't dry, cold foods with EBT. You have to have cash or cash aid and stuff. And because I get such limited cash aid, getting those Walmart gift cards like made a huge difference every month because I was able to use those to get the things we needed, like toiletries and dog food, which were the main things I was struggling with buying. But I definitely am stressed out financially, like all the time. I'm lucky enough to have a partner that's usually working. And I say usually just because my partner happens to not be working right now. But my partner is usually working and has a large skill set. So usually their work is pretty lucrative. But I don't believe in being 100% codependent. It's something that I've struggled with. My mom, I still struggle with it with her, in all honesty, financial codependency on her. The cash aid wouldn't be enough if I didn't have help from her. Like we just wouldn't survive. I wouldn't have enough money to get clothes for my kid and feed us and everything that I do. I wouldn't have enough money for medication for myself to get the treatment I require. Insurance only goes so far, you know. And I think it's really impactful towards my academic progress because the more stress financially I have, the less I'm able to prioritize my academic goals because I'm constantly trying to prioritize, you know, how I'm going to get food on the table, how I'm going to pay my rent, how I'm going to pay my utilities. I'm in a quite 100% honesty overdrafted in my account and waiting for school to disburse me some money so that I can get out of the red. I'm fortunate enough to qualify for the other supportive programs aside from financial aid. But like I said, I probably wouldn't still be enrolled if it weren't for those programs. I mean, I've even let the people at those programs know how much of a night and day difference it makes to me to know that they're rooting for me and that they're in my corner, like if I need help and stuff. And the Pride Center too, like it's not structured supportive service the way that most of the other supportive services on campus are, but there's still counseling. There's still a place to hang out and feel safe and a place to get snacks and stuff like that. Like it still makes a huge difference having those things. And I don't remember if we were on camera earlier. I mentioned I live in Folsom and I don't go to FLC, I go to SCC. And the real reason is because SCC has supportive programs unlike any of the other Los Rios campuses. FLC has the programs, but the people here, it's just different. The people here, you can tell that they care about you and they make you feel really important. And that's something that I'd travel an unlimited amount of time for, personally.
So what about being a single parent and pursuing an education and now this semester you're full time? How do you kind of balance being a single parent and taking your classes?
So I think it's getting easier since my kid is of school age now. He'll be in school, so I can be in school. I do refer to myself as a single parent in the terms of my child's other parent isn't in the photo or the big picture really, but my partner and I do co-parent. So I'm not alone. I do have more help than other single parents do, and I'm very, very grateful for it. I find that co-parenting with a partner who also has a child, my partner's kid is older now, but my partner who also has a child, having experience as a parent it makes it really easy for me to talk to my partner about parenting and about what I expect with my kid. And my partner has stepped up and taken on a really big role in my kid's life. Um, I don't think it'll ever get to the point where my partner is referred to as the gender specific term for parent, but my kid does refer to my partner as with my partner's name, like claiming my partner in a way, and it's very endearing. And I know that kind of like having step parent situation, it's really up to the child's discretion on how comfortable they are with with their parent's partner and stuff. But I love watching them interact. They're very close, and my kid really trusts my partner.
That's nice. Okay, so I have two questions I want to make sure to get to. I know we've been interviewing you for quite some time, but so
Well, like I said, I love to talk.
How important do you think it is to include, or actually, let's say, focus on queer and trans topics in the course curriculum for you to feel included and seen at SCC?
Well, I think initial introductions, it's more important than any other part of the semester. Because to set a tone for the semester of, you know, we see you, we're going to respect you, those topics need to be brought up like immediately. Like one of the first things I think people should do, which is really common to do without pronouns, is to ask people to introduce themselves in the classroom. It's a very common thing to do in a classroom setting, especially on the first or day or week or so. To go around the room, usually from my experience, professors and or group team leaders of whatever you're doing for introductions, they'll always ask you what your name is and possibly something about you, like a favorite food, a favorite color, or just tell me something about yourself. When it's an open-ended question, like just tell me something about yourself, that makes it really easy if you want to add in pronouns. But I think an important thing is when you're asking those questions, like what's your name, and the other question, because it's usually a two-question thing, to add pronouns into that question. Introduce yourself with your name and your pronouns. And if it's not asked, just automatically list your pronouns after you say your name. It makes it easier for people to know what pronouns you prefer from the beginning. And I think, like I was saying, it sets a tone for the rest of the year in the classroom for people to know that they can be respected for who they are. I think in regards to topics being covered during the semester, that depends on the course. Obviously, you wouldn't want irrelevant content in a course, but there are courses where talking about trans liberation or queer liberation, or really just touching topic on definitions even, it can be relevant in a variety of subjects, especially psychology and history, art as well. There's quite a few topics where you can make it relevant. I mean, even biology, you can make it relevant. There's a certain level of like comfort in talking about those subjects that each individual professor and student will have. And each professor will be a certain amount comfortable with students talking about those subjects to whatever extent. Some professors are completely comfortable talking about it open-endedly, and other professors have really strict, like, hey, this is where we stop the conversation boundaries. And I just think it's important to have those conversations without deviating from prioritizing learning.
So have you ever taken courses like queer studies, queer literature, queer history, courses that just sort of like focus entirely on queer topics?
I personally have not. I think I mentioned it early in the interview. The only course I took that like even went into like definitions about gender identity, sexuality, stuff like that was a psychology, human sexuality course. And it was one chapter in the whole book. It was very bleak, but it was still thorough. Like it was as little information as they could give while still acknowledging and touching base on the topic. And there was the one thing, the definitions of bisexual and pansexual in the textbook that didn't sit right with me. I couldn't repeat exactly what they were because it wasn't true to what I know about the sexualities. But the vagueness of it was they tried to make bisexuality into this like kind of gatekeeping sexuality, like trans people aren't allowed in bisexuality because it's like binary or something. And that when I had this realization, I kind of changed my own idea of what bisexuality means to me, since I don't identify as pansexual. And I don't agree with people or I don't disagree with people who identify that way, but I don't agree with the definition of what that sexuality means. I feel like it can be in its own way validating to one's sexuality, saying, I don't care what's in your pants, like that's not what matters to me, can be a sexuality in my opinion. But the problematic side of it is that it's undermining bisexuality and essentially saying that people who are bisexual have genital preferences. And that's not inherently true about bisexuality. Some bisexuals will have genital preferences, but just because you're bisexual doesn't mean that you automatically do. It's just, I guess it's more common. And the whole point of pansexuality is just no genital preference whatsoever. And I, again, respect it. I just don't entirely agree with the definition. I feel like it is too broad. Like it could be narrowed and specified better, and then it might be easier to understand for me. It's not even that I don't entirely accept the definition, it's that I don't entirely understand the meaning of, like, behind the definition, like what they're trying to make a point of. Because from a certain perspective, it does seem like they're trying to make a point of saying that they're the only sexuality that doesn't care about genitals, or like that doesn't have a genital preference, because they're in turn defining other sexualities based on genital preference. And that's where I have my own like confusion and problem with it, because sexuality isn't about genitals or genital preference. And that could be, dug into more depth about, sexuality not meaning genitals. But the simplest way I can put it is, if you're a man attracted to a trans man, you're still a gay man. Like, if you identify as a gay man, just because the man you're attracted to is trans doesn't make you any less gay. Like, it doesn't make you straight if that person doesn't have the biological genitalia associated with that gender. It doesn't make you any more queer either, though. But yeah, I think it's just slightly problematic. And there's a lot of people that are really open to discussing it as well, like pansexual people and bisexual people, willing to have discussions about what the deeper meaning is for them and their lived experience with their sexuality.
So one additional question I definitely want to get to, there are a lot of other questions I could be asking, and because I really appreciate this conversation, but in an effort to, wrap up at some point, I want to ask you about facilities. So I know that you've been online so far, and you're about to be in person But how have you found access to all gender bathrooms? How has that been for you? Have you felt a need for all gender bathrooms?
So I prefer the men's bathroom. Like that's just a me thing. There are certain days, however, where I dress more femininely and don't feel comfortable going into the men's bathroom in that dress, like not literal dress, but the way I'm dressed. And it really just depends on where I am in the city, because certain parts of Sacramento, like where I live in Folsom, is more conservative. Um, I think that finding all gender bathrooms should definitely be easier than it is. Because there's a lot of queer people on campus that don't even know where the bathrooms are. The Pride Center has a Discord, and somebody in the Discord asked, "Where are the gender neutral bathrooms?" Nobody answered. Nobody had an answer. There's hundreds of people in the Discord. So not easy. It's not the easiest to find, and I think it's not the most obvious either. And in regards to finding them, I think it can be problematic to try to ask, like, hey, where's the gender neutral bathrooms? Like that could potentially be problematic if you ask the wrong person. Like, 'cause somebody could get offended that you're even asking them, like, what do you think, I'm queer type offense. Or somebody could just be transphobic towards you and be rude for that reason, or ignore you for that reason. And then a lot of people just won't know, like I was saying, like even other queer students, like they just might not know where it is and can't be of help. I think on the map they could make it a little more obvious. Like it's obvious where the bathrooms are, but they could make like a symbol or something that shows on the map the like that it's gender neutral.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like even if it's just a bathroom logo with a man and a woman and the line between, like the gender neutral bathroom logo, like just something like that on the map could be convenient. Or even somebody making a sign, gender neutral bathrooms this way. You know, that could work too.
Yeah, I find that what often happens is like the Pride Center will create resources for queer students to find things like all gender bathrooms. Like I know at ARC there's a map with all the all gender bathrooms, but then you have to find the map.
Yeah,
Right?
it's not. Yeah, it's not just the map. It's its own separate thing.
Everything's
Yeah,
separated out. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think that gives a tonality of exclusivity when it's separate.
Have you ever felt uncomfortable or mistreated in the bathroom?
Not at college.
How about elsewhere?
I got jumped in the drive-ins in the bathroom one time. I was wearing a crop top in the men's bathroom, and 4 grown men jumped me when I was by myself at the drive-ins on Bradshaw.
How awful.
Yeah, it was 3 grown men and then a 4th random bystander joined in. It was terrible. I have not gone by myself since.
That's horrifying.
Yeah. Yeah. It's even more horrifying when you go with someone else and they're not willing to go to the bathroom with you, and you're just like, but I'm unsafe. Like, I need your help. Because honestly, it sucks to say this, but if, as a trans person, you have a cisgendered person with you in the bathroom, it's already 10 times safer. Like, automatically.
Okay. Anything else you want to add? Any questions you want to return to before we wrap up?
I would like to mention the resources. I am going to be sort of rude and pull out my phone. The first resource I'd like to mention is What's the Tea by Juno Dawson. That book is completely about the trans experience, non-binary experience. It goes into details about definitions and like what it means to be not cis, not specifically trans, but to be not cisgendered. A really good one that I also recommend is Yes, You Are Trans Enough by Mia Violet. It's my transition from self-loathing to self-love, and it's essentially a outside perspective, like a third person autobiography where she writes about her experiences, but is also solidifying and affirming other people's questioning their questioning, really. Because being trans is a weird thing, especially if you don't want to physically transition, because there's so many things in media telling you that you have to do certain things to be a certain gender. And this book is just telling you, you know, you are the gender you believe you are. And you're the only one who can tell you different. The other one, Testosterone Files, The Testosterone Files by Max Wolf Valerio. And that's another autobiography. It's more of a memoir of his transition from female to male and the impact that it had on his social, emotional, everything. Like, it's a really, really interesting read. And then P. Carl wrote a book, Becoming a Man. That book, I haven't gotten around to reading yet, but I have it on my shelf, and I have heard really good things about that. I actually found out about that book through Elliot Page, the actor that recently came out as trans. He was reading that book and recommended it on like Instagram or something like that, and I found it and bought it. Some other resources, not queer related, but related to my disability. Complex CPTSD, it's C-PTSD, From Surviving to Thriving by Pete Walker. The Body Keeps the Score. Everybody knows about that one. You can just look that up. I don't want to mispronounce the author's name. But that's the most commonly recommended trauma resource, and it's very informed, a very heavy read, but it's about how trauma truly affects our bodies and not just our minds. And then the last one, Hiking the Mountain in Flip-Flops, and I cannot remember the author's name for that one.